Verse 6. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. And he said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." Exodus 16, verses 1 to 8. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." And then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days." So Moses and Aaron said to all of the Israelites, "In the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us?" Moses also said, "You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord." May he add his blessing to the reading and the hearing of his word today.
Friends, won't you pray with me this morning? Gracious and almighty God, let this time of reflection be about you and for you. Instruct our hearts in the ways that we need to be awoken. Grant us strength and courage to face the systems of this world that keep our brothers and sisters down. Bless the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts. Might it be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. This week, I thought a lot about hunger. Do you know that we are wired as people to know when we're thirsty or when we're hungry? Now, for the nurses and the doctors in the room today, I'm going to try and describe from a lay person's perspective how this works. And I know you're probably going to be shaking your heads, but bear with me. Scientists back in the 1950s started to discover how our brain actually functions. And what they learned is through a series of chemical changes in the brain, electrical impulses, changes in polarity, positive and negative, cause charges to jump back and forth. So the way in which you and I and our brains function is primarily on a system of electrical charges. Well, they discovered this when they were testing laboratory rats or mice of some kind. Why the mice and the rats always get the raw end of the deal, I have no idea. But the ones that were born as dogs are like, whew. But what they found was how much current they could apply, and at certain points when they applied it to the brain of a mouse, it's like or would twitch. When they realized how much voltage they could apply in low amounts, they actually migrated this to human beings. Right, Doc? And in doing so, when they provided electric charge at one point, the person sitting there would go, wow, it tastes salt. Or their arm would move. And they started to realize that the brain became the central part of all of our reality. That all motion, all movement, the thing that drives your heart to beat, your lungs to take air in, the thing that allows you to see the difference between blue and red, and orange and white and black, all come from impulses in the brain. Well, at the most center part of the brain, when they applied a charge to this core center that they'll call the pleasure center, people started to experience a sense of satisfaction and euphoria. And they said, what causes this? When they took it away, the people grew kind of aggressive and angry. And so what they learned is, in this whole thing, that that is the part of your brain that tells your body that you're hungry or that you're thirsty. And they call it the pleasure center because, when it's fed, you feel satisfied. Interestingly enough, I know a lot about this because opiates, alcohol, and other drugs that pass in through a barrier that your brain has get to this pleasure center and feed it as well. And when they're taken away, the addict actually starts to feel a hunger and a thirst for it to be fed again. So we have been wired to know when our bodies have needs. And in like ways, we have been wired, I believe, by God to know the difference between right and wrong. We know when we see certain situations or hear certain situations that we say, you know what? That just isn't right. That doesn't come universally as we adopt what we call laws or rules of living for safety. That doesn't become just an individual thing. But there's a sense in which when we look, for instance, at the Ten Commandments and we say, thou shalt not kill, yeah. Thou shalt not steal, yeah. Thou shalt honor the parents, yeah. There's kind of a sense of a rightness about that, right? Don't bear false witness, yeah. This kind of rules that have bubbled up in the Jewish community and have been handed down from God and through history and their adaptation at times, they offer us a structure to name what we already know. What's right and what's wrong. Then I wondered for a minute, why do we at times become so deadened and so blind to those impulses? Why do we start our lives of sin realizing and recognizing through guilt that we shouldn't be doing what we're doing, but over time can rationalize that as really just not all that bad of a sin? Right? Flip Wilson used to say the devil made me do it. You don't know who Flip Wilson is, ask your parents or grandparents. I just dated myself there. Right? There is this sense that at times we can go, well, you know what? And I think that comes from this. I think it comes from at times we'd rather not have our own junk painted on a billboard on 23 or 50 or 35, right? We all know that at times we've done things that are poor choices, bad decisions. We at times have, in a way, ventured from what God wants from us. Shame and guilt can be pretty powerful emotions in guiding our thoughts and our reasoning. But I think there are times in which we can allow fear to overcome us. Look at the Israelites today. They're not only thirsting and hungry, believe me, I've been in Israel, and if you're going through the desert, it doesn't take long to get thirsty. But they also have lost the sense that the God who brought them out of a life of pain is leading them to a life of eternal pleasure. But that is God's will for us. Sometimes we got to cross the wildernesses of life to make that happen. And at times when we're caught in the wilderness, fear can overtake us. Let me give you an example from my own life. They say it takes a village to raise a child. In a neighborhood that I moved into, there was this family that moved 2 doors down who was a bit different. They were from a foreign country. They had funny accents. They looked different ways. They cooked food different ways. And what we learned in the years as they moved in, that their oldest son, who was a year younger than my oldest son in middle school at the time, was getting bullied and ostracized for his differences on the bus. Now, at any point in which you may have said anything to the family that might have shed them in a poorer light than what they wanted, then the wrath of the mother came down on all of us. Who are you to say that my child, or I heard this rumor? Very confrontationally, very directly, almost very challengingly, many of the neighbors had either heard stories or experienced, as we experienced, her wrath. This was the perfect storm for what was to come. And what was to come was the fact that this young man, seeking a sense of community and belonging that we all have, found it with those who were partaking in drugs, both using and selling. To the point that the neighborhood knew that this young man, maybe to support his habit, maybe to make some money, I don't know, was brought into this system of selling drugs. As he matured into his high school years, his mom and dad both went to work, and during the summer, then there were several cars that would show up in the driveway for short visits. So obvious so that my neighbor, who was Chinese and spoke very little English, came to me one day, the man who lived between us, and said, pointing to their house, "Not so good things happening over here?" Yeah, I said, No one dared to share that news with his parents, out of fear that the wrath would come. Who are you to say this? Eventually, the problem would bubble to a point that finally on one particular evening, there was an altercation between 2 brothers in the house. He was one of them involved. A gun went off. No one was harmed or hurt, but there was a lot of scared people. The brother that ran out of the house called the police. And knowing the type of guns and ammunition in the house, SWAT covered the neighborhood and shut it down. And it wasn't until the extreme situation presented itself to me that I really ever thought, could this have been prevented? I mean, now even the neighbors distant in the neighborhood couldn't get in on that Saturday evening. Literally, fire trucks had blocked this off, and I've never seen SWAT move, but I'm telling you, wow. Eventually, this young man would be handcuffed in just his undershorts in the middle of February, in the middle of the subdivision, and hauled away. If it takes a village to raise a child, then where were we? How did we allow fear? How did we allow the thought, it's not my problem, to overtake our sense of reasoning and responsibility in caring for the young man's future? It could have started from me as a simple conversation with my boys at the table as they told me about how he was being ostracized in middle school. Well, could you be his friend? Might have made all the difference and set him on a different course. But it didn't. I saw and thought, man, this just isn't right. But I didn't have the strength or the courage to do anything about it. Would I go down that same road again? Boy, I hope not. Maybe for me, this was a way in which God would reveal to me systems that come into play that set people in situations of injustice. Now I know you and I could probably sit here and have a conversation that this boy's destiny is a result of his own choices and his own actions. But as I grew in my understanding of how addiction works, I'm here to tell you that an addict cannot control the basic impulse and the need to feed the pleasure center. They need to be taught to recognize signs that are leading them to a place that will continue to hurt them and culture. So it leads us to a question. Will we step up? And will we stand up? Will we encourage the person who's caught in the plight and fight for a way for them to be freed from it? Or will we continue to allow that thing that continues to say to us, man, this isn't right, to be muted further and further and further in our lives? After all, we've been wired to recognize and acknowledge situations that are wrong. And the Christian community, I believe, in faith, has a responsibility that when we receive the gift of grace and forgiveness in our own lives, to step in the gap. Because we know what our eternal destiny already is. We have nothing to fear. Fear does not have a hold on us. That the life of Christ has opened a door for us to eternal happiness and satisfaction. And that the struggles and the suffering are only momentary. They're brief in total concept of what eternity will bring. So I ask you, would you include yourself in the group that Jesus spoke about that day? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Or have you found satisfaction through fear, through insecurity, and through the rationalization that it's somebody else's problem? Will you allow, in some way, the message of the gospel to come to say, man, if you feel it's not right, it's our responsibility to do something about it? Will you allow that conscious thought that bubbles up to get all the way to the surface, or will you continue to suppress it like I did? Like I still struggle with? Or will you go on a journey with God saying, Lord, reveal to me a portion, a way in which I can demonstrate my faithfulness to you today, in which I can show with gratitude and grace a new life lived, breaking down the forces of injustice. Let me tell you, if you're willing to do that, Satan's not going to be real happy about it. Life sometimes gets worse before it gets better. And that's where we need to draw upon the strength and the peace of God that you drew upon at this very table today. It's just like the Israelites did, crying out to God for nourishment for the journey. To the point in which we all can rest our heads at night, knowing we did everything possible to address the situations that have caused us to think yet again, man, that's just not right. We've been wired to see it. We're filled with faith to do something about it. And with John's help, we can. Amen? I want to invite, as the band members come forward, a time of rending of our hearts and confession of the ways in which we have allowed God's instructions to be needed. Gracious and holy God, we give to you this day, this opportunity, this life that you have given to us. Open our eyes to see. Open our hearts to feel. Give strength to our hands and feet to know. To shed light on situations in our lives and in our world that need your corrective touch. Help us as your people to be free. Free from fear, free from doubt, free to love, free to give, and free to hope. Come, Holy Spirit, enliven your people once again in your ways. And all God's children said,